I trusted you with everything. And this is how you repay that loyalty?
Before he could inherit a billion-dollar empire, Ethan Cross was ordered to disappear into a security uniform for 6 months. No name, no privilege, just quiet humiliation from people who had no idea his father owned the building they worked in. One woman treated him like a human being. One man made it his mission to break him. If you've ever been looked down on by someone who had no idea who they were talking to, stay until the end, because what happens at that conference table changes everything. Like, subscribe, and let's begin. Richard Cross did not raise his voice often. When he did, the room went still. Sit down, Ethan. Ethan Cross, 28 years old, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, lowered himself into the leather chair across from his father's mahogany desk. Behind Richard, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, the very skyline his family's company, Humiliated Limited, had helped build over 3 decades. You called this an emergency meeting, Ethan said. Is something wrong with the merger? Richard folded his hands. Nothing is wrong with the merger. Something is wrong with you. With me? You've never worked a single day you didn't already own a piece of, Richard said. You know numbers. You know boardrooms. You don't know people. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but his father raised a hand. For 6 months, you will wear that uniform, forget your last name, and earn respect nobody hands you for free. The words landed like a verdict. Ethan sat back slowly. You want me to work security in my own building, not your building, not yet. Richard's eyes did not soften. You will be Ethan Steele. Security, front lobby, third shift and days, whatever they assign you. Nobody, not HR, not the executives, not a single soul on that floor, will know who you are. Not even your mother agreed to tell you this until today. And if I refuse, then I hand this company to your cousin Damien when I retire, and you can go run your trust fund into the ground buying yachts. Richard's voice finally cracked, just slightly, with something that sounded almost like hope. I built this from nothing, Ethan. I was a night shift guard once too, before anyone gave me a chance. I need to know the man who takes my place understands what it costs. The people who make this company run, not the spreadsheet version, the real one. Ethan stared at his father for a long moment. He thought about every director's meeting he'd sat in, every deal he'd closed from behind glass walls, every handshake that came because of the name on his business card and not the man attached to it. 6 months, Ethan finally said. No one finds out. No one, Richard agreed. Not even if they spit in your face. Neither of them knew yet how close that warning would come to the truth. The first morning, Ethan stood in front of a cracked mirror in a rented studio apartment 11 miles from the penthouse he actually owned, buttoning a black uniform shirt with a stiff embroidered patch that read, "Security" over his heart. He'd traded his Italian leather shoes for scuffed boots, and his Rolex for a $10 digital watch his father had personally handed him. Almost like a joke, almost like a warning. The Humiliated Limited tower rose 40 stories into the morning fog, gold letters catching the first light. Ethan had walked through that lobby 1,000 times as the boss's son. Today he walked through the staff entrance around back, badge clipped to his belt, and nobody looked at him twice. His supervisor, a weathered man named Gus who'd worked the building for 11 years, sized him up without much interest. You're the new transfer. Front desk, days, sign here, here, and here. You clock in, you clock out, you don't sit down unless it's your 15. He slid a clipboard across the counter. Rules are rules, kid. Doesn't matter whose son you are. Ethan almost laughed at the irony. Understood. By 9 a.m., he was standing at the edge of the marble lobby he had once walked through as a cross, now invisible in a uniform that made him furniture. Employees streamed past in waves, badges swinging, coffee cups sweating, eyes fixed on their phones. Not one of them looked at his face. That was the first lesson his father wanted him to learn. He hadn't even clocked a full hour, and he'd already learned it. Naomi Carter arrived at 9:47, 11 minutes late, apologizing to no one in particular as she swiped her badge and hurried toward the elevator bank. She was 26, a project coordinator in the marketing division, 3 years into a job she'd fought hard to get after putting herself through school working 2 jobs. She had a habit of talking fast when she was nervous, and this morning, badge malfunctioning, elevator stalling, coffee spilling down her sleeve, she was very nervous. Come on, she muttered at the badge reader, tapping it against the sensor for the 4th time. Try holding it flat, not at an angle, Ethan said from behind the security desk. The chip reader's been glitching on that panel for a week. Maintenance hasn't fixed it. Naomi turned, surprised anyone had spoken to her, let alone the guard. Most days the front desk staff blurred into the wallpaper, the way uniforms tend to when people are rushing. She held the badge flat. The light blinked green. "Oh, thank you." She smiled. Genuine, a little embarrassed. "I swear this building hates me on Mondays." "Buildings usually do," Ethan said. She laughed, actually laughed, and something about the sound cut through the noise of the lobby in a way that surprised him. "I'm Naomi." "Ethan," he said, and it felt strange and true at the same time, because for the next 6 months, that half of his name was the only one that existed. "Well, thank you, Ethan. You just saved me from being screamed at by my project lead." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "Have a good one." He watched her disappear into the elevator and told himself it meant nothing. He had a job to do, a father to prove wrong, or right, he wasn't sure which yet. He didn't expect that small kindness to be the only warmth he'd feel for weeks. Marcus Voss noticed Naomi before she noticed him, the way he noticed most things, like they belonged to him simply because he wanted them to. Marcus was 31, a rising VP in business development, sharp-suited, sharper-tongued, the kind of man who had learned early that charm opened doors that talent alone couldn't. He'd been circling Naomi for months, sending calendar invites disguised as quick syncs, complimenting her work in meetings a little too loudly, a little too often. That Monday, he caught the tail end of her exchange with the new guard from across the lobby, and something about the ease of her laugh needled him in a place he didn't like to examine. "New guy giving you trouble?" Marcus asked, falling into step beside her at the elevator. "No, he fixed my badge. That's more than I can say for the last 3 people I asked." Marcus glanced back at Ethan, who was already helping the next employee, unaware he'd become the subject of anyone's attention. "Huh," Marcus said, filing something away in the back of his mind, though he couldn't have said exactly what yet. It would take him 3 more weeks to name the feeling. By then, it had already curdled into something uglier than jealousy. The first month passed in a blur of long shifts and small cruelties Ethan had never known existed on this side of the building. He learned which executives never said thank you. He learned the janitor named Wilfred had worked there 19 years and had never once been invited to a company party. He learned that Gus kept a photo of his granddaughter taped inside his locker because he worked doubles to pay for her college and hadn't seen a Saturday off in 6 months. He also learned, slowly, painfully, what it felt like to be spoken over. "Move," a director snapped one afternoon, not even glancing at him as she brushed past toward the elevator, nearly knocking a stack of visitor badges from his hands. "Excuse me, sir. I need to see identification," Ethan said to a man in an expensive coat who tried to walk past the visitor check-in without signing in. "Do you know how much business I do in this building?" the man said, not stopping. "I don't, sir, but I do need you to sign in." The man scoffed and kept walking. Nobody backed Ethan up. Nobody even seemed to notice. He thought of his father's voice. "You've never worked a single day you didn't already own a piece of." For the first time in his life, Ethan understood what that sentence actually meant. The only bright spot, the only 10 minutes of his day that didn't feel like sand running through his fingers, was when Naomi came through the lobby. She always said good morning. She always asked how his weekend was, and actually waited for the answer. Once, she brought him a coffee because she said she'd noticed he never got a break long enough to grab his own. Nobody else in that building had noticed anything about him at all. By the second month, Marcus had made it his personal mission to find reasons to walk past the front desk when Naomi was near, and by extension, reasons to needle the guard who kept making her laugh. "You're new," Marcus said one afternoon, leaning against the desk with the practiced ease of a man who had never once worried about being fired. "Steele, right? That's on your badge." "Yes, sir." "You know you're supposed to check every visitor's ID, not just wave through whoever looks important?" "I check everyone's ID, sir." "Don't argue with me." Marcus's voice sharpened, pitched just loud enough to draw a glance from the 2 women waiting for the elevator. "I watched you let that delivery guy walk right past without logging him. It wasn't true, and they both knew it. But Ethan had learned quickly that arguing only made men like Marcus louder. "I'll make sure it's logged, sir. My apologies." "Yeah, make sure it is." Marcus straightened his tie and glanced toward the elevator, where Naomi had just stepped out, badge in hand, oblivious to what had just happened. His whole posture changed, softened, brightened. "Naomi, I was just heading up to your floor, actually. Wanted to run something by you. I've got a deadline, Marcus. Can it wait?" "Course." He smiled, but Ethan, watching from the desk, caught the flicker underneath it. Something thin and brittle, like a man used to being told yes. Marcus glanced back at Ethan on his way past, and for the briefest second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with visitor logs at all. The humiliations grew smaller and sharper after that, the way certain men learn to bruise without leaving a mark anyone else can see. Marcus started testing Ethan in front of others, asking him trick questions about protocol, correcting him loudly for things he hadn't done wrong, making comments about some people just being built for standing around all day, just quiet enough that Ethan couldn't call it out without looking like he was starting something. "You ever think about doing something with your life?" Marcus asked one evening, catching Ethan alone near the loading dock as he clocked out. "I mean, real ambition. Not?" He gestured vaguely at the uniform. This pays my rent," Ethan said evenly, though something in his chest had gone tight and hot. "Sure, rent." Marcus smiled like he'd won something. "Some of us built more than that, though. Some of us are going somewhere." Ethan thought about the 39th floor, about the office with his father's name on the door, about the fact that in 6 months this man would very possibly be reporting to him. He said none of it. "Have a good night, sir." Marcus's jaw tightened at the word sir, as if even that small courtesy felt like an insult when it came from someone he'd decided was beneath him. He walked away without another word. It happened again the next week, and the week after that. A comment about Ethan's shoes. A joke about rent-a-cops loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. Once, Marcus deliberately dropped a folder of papers at Ethan's feet and didn't apologize, just said, "Well, that's kind of your job too, isn't it?" Ethan picked up the papers. His hands didn't shake, though his pulse did. He thought about quitting the charade 100 times. He thought about walking upstairs, badge and all, and telling Marcus exactly who he was talking to. But every time the thought surfaced, his father's voice came with it. "No matter what happens, you don't reveal who you are. Anyone can be kind to someone with power. I need to know who you are when you have none." So Ethan swallowed it, every single time, and kept it. Naomi noticed. She noticed the tightness in Ethan's jaw after Marcus walked away, the way his shoulders dropped a half-inch when he thought no one was looking. She started timing her arrivals so she'd catch him before Marcus did, started bringing an extra coffee more often than not, started asking real questions and listening to real answers. "Why do you let him talk to you like that?" she asked one evening, the lobby quiet, most of the building emptied out for the night. "Because it's not worth losing my job over," Ethan said, which was true, if not for the reasons she assumed. "That's not fair. You're one of the only people in this building who actually treats people like people." She hesitated, then added, quieter, "I notice things like that, more than you'd think." "I notice things too," Ethan admitted. "You always say good morning, even on the days you're rushing. My mom used to say, you can tell everything about someone by how they treat people who can't do anything for them." Naomi shrugged, a little embarrassed by her own sincerity. "I try to remember that." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded moving across his face before he caught it. "Your mom sounds like she'd have liked my father." "Yeah? What's he like?" "Complicated," Ethan said, and let it sit there, unexplained, the way a locked door sits in a hallway. Visible, unremarkable, and full of things no one on the other side could see yet. It was the first time in 2 months Ethan had felt like a person instead of a uniform. Word had started to travel, the way it does in every office building, that Marcus Voss had a thing for the marketing coordinator on the 4th floor, and that she wasn't interested. His colleagues teased him about it at first, light, harmless, until the teasing touched a nerve none of them realized was already raw. "Just ask her out already," a coworker said one Friday over drinks. "Worst she says is no." "She already said no," Marcus admitted, a little too much bourbon making his voice looser than usual. "Twice." "Ouch, man." "It's not." Marcus stopped, swirled his glass, stared at the amber liquid like it owed him an answer. "It's that guard, the new one on the front desk. She's got some kind of thing going with him." "The security guy?" His coworker laughed, disbelieving. "Come on, Marcus. I'm serious. I've seen them. Coffee, laughing, whatever." Marcus's knuckles went white around the glass. "A guy makes minimum wage checking badges, and she picks him over." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. His face said the rest. "Over someone like me." That night, something in Marcus shifted from wounded pride into something colder, more deliberate. He didn't decide to destroy Ethan Steele all at once. Cruelty like that rarely announces itself. It just starts finding reasons. The 3rd month brought the worst of it. Marcus began filing complaints. Small, petty, technically defensible things. A late badge scan that was actually on time. A missed radio check that had in fact been logged. He cornered Gus in the break room and suggested, with practiced concern, that the new transfer might not be a good fit for a client-facing role, dropping just enough doubt to make HR raise an eyebrow. Then came the night of the gala. Simonotic Limited was hosting investors in the lobby atrium, transformed for the evening with white orchids and a string quartet, champagne towers glittering under new lighting rigs. Ethan had been assigned to stand at the main entrance, checking names against a guest list, invisible in his uniform among tuxedos and gowns that cost more than his monthly paycheck. Marcus arrived early, dressed sharp, clearly hoping to catch Naomi before the event began. He found Ethan first. "Big night," Marcus said, looking him up and down. "Try not to embarrass the company standing there like that." "I'll do my job, sir." "Your job." Marcus laughed, low and mean, loud enough that a passing catering staffer glanced over. "You know what's funny? Guys like you always think this," he gestured at the whole glittering room, "is going to be yours someday. Some big break. Some Cinderella story." He stepped closer, voice dropping to something private and cruel. "It's not. This is mine. People like Naomi don't end up with people like you. Not really. Not when it matters." Ethan's hands curled at his sides, every instinct in him screaming to end this, to say the 6 words that would collapse Marcus's whole worldview in an instant. "My father owns this building." But he thought of his father's face across that mahogany desk, the promise he'd made, and he held it. "Enjoy the gala, sir," Ethan said instead, voice level as stone. Marcus's smile curdled at the refusal to react. He turned, and in doing so, accidentally knocked a full champagne glass from a passing tray directly onto the front of Ethan's uniform. "Oh," Marcus said, "not sorry at all. Clumsy me." Several guests turned to look. A few laughed, assuming it was nothing, a spilled drink, an accident. Naomi, arriving just in time to see it, did not assume anything of the sort. She'd seen the tilt of Marcus's shoulder, the deliberate angle of his wrist. "Marcus," she said, sharp enough to cut through the string quartet's melody. "What is wrong with you?" "It was an accident," Marcus said, all wounded innocence. "It wasn't." Naomi grabbed a stack of napkins from the nearest table and pressed them into Ethan's hands, ignoring the champagne now soaking into her own sleeve as she helped. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Ethan said, and meant it more than she knew, because in that moment, watching her stand up for him, in front of half the executive floor, something in his chest cracked open, in a way he hadn't expected and couldn't yet name. Marcus watched the two of them, jaw tight, and walked away without another word. But something in his eyes, before he turned, promised this wasn't finished. It never occurred to him, not once, to wonder who Ethan Steele actually was. That same week, Ethan's mother, Diane Cross, showed up unannounced at his rented studio apartment, carrying a paper bag of groceries he did not need, given the salary his father had insisted he live on for 6 months. "You look thinner," she said, setting the bag on the counter and studying him like she was cataloging every difference between this version of her son and the one who used to complain about thread counts. "I'm working, Mom. It's not a spa. I told your father this was cruel. You told him it was necessary. I heard you both arguing about it before the trip to Aspen." Diane sighed, sitting on the edge of the secondhand couch like it might collapse under her if she trusted it too much. "I told him both things could be true." She looked at him for a long moment. "How is it? Really?" Ethan was quiet for a while, turning a chipped mug over in his hands. "There's a girl," he finally admitted, "Naomi, in marketing. She has no idea who I am, and she's kinder to me than half the people who've known my name my whole life." Diane's face softened in a way that made him feel, briefly, like a teenager again. "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying," Ethan said honestly, "because when this ends, I don't know if what we have will survive the truth. If it's real," his mother said, standing to leave, pressing a kiss to the top of his head like she used to when he was small, "it'll survive a lot more than a name." He thought about that conversation more than he let on, turning it over every night after that, long after her car had pulled away from the curb. The gala incident should have ended in a formal complaint, but Ethan didn't file one, and Naomi didn't either, at his quiet request. "It's not worth it," he told her, though the real reason, that filing a complaint against a VP would draw exactly the kind of scrutiny that could unravel the last 3 months, stayed locked behind his teeth. Naomi didn't understand it, but she respected it. "You're a better person than I would be," she told him. "If someone treated me like that, I don't know if I could just let it go." "I'm not letting it go," Ethan said. "I'm choosing when it matters." She looked at him a long moment, something curious and warm behind her eyes. "You say things like that sometimes, like you know something the rest of us don't. Maybe I do. He almost smiled. Maybe someday I'll tell you. I'll hold you to that. Their friendship deepened in the weeks after, quietly, the way real things tend to grow, not in grand gestures but in small, accumulated honesty. She told him about putting herself through college, about a father who left when she was 9, and a mother who worked 2 jobs and still made time to check her homework every night. He told her, carefully, edited but true, about a father who built something from nothing and who was determined his son would understand the cost of it. He never lied to her. He simply didn't finish the whole truth, and every day that passed made the unfinished part heavier to carry. Marcus's campaign escalated in the 4th month, quieter now, more calculated. He began speaking to HR in careful, concerned tones, planting seeds, that the new security transfer seemed overly familiar with staff, that his background check might be worth a second look, that there had been some questions about his conduct. None of it was true. All of it was designed to be difficult to disprove. There were smaller moments too, ones that never made it into any formal complaint, but stacked up in Ethan's memory, like stones in a pocket, each one light on its own, unbearable together. There was the afternoon a delivery driver, running late and frustrated, screamed at Ethan for a service elevator being out of order, a problem entirely outside his control, and not one of the 6 executives walking past stopped to intervene, though 2 of them slowed down to watch. There was the intern who asked him, with the casual cruelty only the very young and very comfortable can manage, whether he'd ever thought about going back to school or something, as though standing at a desk for 8 hours a day meant a man had given up on having a mind at all. There was the client, visiting for a contract signing, who handed Ethan his coat without a word, without a glance, the way a person hands off an object rather than addresses a human being, and walked into the elevator already dialing his phone. None of these moments would have broken him alone. Together, spread across 4 months of quiet accumulation, they built something in Ethan that no boardroom lesson ever could have. He began keeping a small notebook in his jacket pocket. Not names, not complaints, just observations. The cleaning staff clock out at 11 p.m., and the last train leaves at 11:15. Nobody has ever asked if that's enough time. Front desk chairs have been broken for 8 months. Maintenance requests ignored 3 times. Nobody in this building knows Wilfred's last name. By the time the 6 months ended, that notebook had 41 entries. Every single one of them would become policy within a year of Ethan taking over. A covered shuttle for the closing shift, a repaired chair, a company directory that listed every employee by name and photo, cleaning staff included, maintenance staff included, security included, small things. The kind of things that only look small from far enough away. Ethan felt the walls tightening as Marcus's campaign continued. Gus, once gruff but fair, started watching him with a wary new caution. A junior HR rep pulled him aside one afternoon for what she called a routine check-in that felt anything but routine. "There's nothing in your file," she admitted, almost apologetic. "But there's been some talk. I just wanted to give you a heads up." "Talk from who?" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I really can't say." Ethan didn't need her to say it. He already knew. That night, walking to the parking garage after his shift, he found Marcus waiting by his car, an old sedan he'd borrowed from the fleet his father kept for exactly this kind of experiment, nothing like the vehicles Ethan actually owned. "You should quit," Marcus said without preamble. "Save yourself the embarrassment." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've got friends in this building who've worked here 15, 20 years. You've got what, 4 months? You think anyone's going to fight for you when it comes down to it?" "I think," Ethan said slowly, "you'd be surprised who fights for who in this building." "Is that supposed to scare me?" "No," Ethan said. "It's supposed to be true." Marcus laughed, short and humorless, and walked off into the dark garage, leaving Ethan standing there with his fists clenched and a promise to his father wearing thinner by the day. The breaking point came 3 weeks before the 6 months were up, on a rainy Tuesday that started ordinary and ended in something neither Ethan nor Naomi would forget. Marcus had cornered Naomi in an empty conference room under the pretense of discussing a project timeline, and what began as professional quickly curdled into something else. "I don't understand what he has that I don't," Marcus said, voice low, controlled in the way that made it worse. "I have a degree from a top school. I make 6 figures. I could give you a life most people would kill for. And you'd rather laugh with some guy who checks badges for a living?" "Marcus, this is inappropriate," Naomi said, stepping back toward the door. "I need to go." "He's nothing," Marcus said, and something in his voice cracked, ugly and raw. You understand that? He's nobody. He'll be replaced by someone else in this building before the year's out, and you'll have wasted your time on a man who has less to offer you than the vending machine in the break room. Ethan, walking past the glass-walled conference room on a routine check, saw Naomi's face through the glass, pale, cornered, her hand already on the door, and something in him that had held for 4 months, patient and disciplined, simply stopped holding. He opened the door without knocking. Is there a problem here? This doesn't concern you, Steele, Marcus snapped, using the name like a slur. It does when you're blocking someone's exit and raising your voice at them. Ethan's tone stayed level, but there was something underneath it now, something that made Marcus's certainty falter for the first time in months. Miss Carter, are you all right? I'm fine, Naomi said, though her voice shook slightly. Marcus was just leaving. I wasn't finished, Marcus said, turning fully toward Ethan now, all his frustration finding a target he thought was safe to hit. You know what you are? You're a joke. A grown man playing dress-up in a rent-a-cop uniform, thinking you're something because a girl felt sorry for you. You've got nothing. No family. No future. Nothing but that badge, and even that's borrowed. The room went very quiet. Careful, Ethan said, so softly it was almost gentle. How sure you are about things you don't actually know. Enlighten me then, Marcus sneered. What don't I know? Ethan looked at him for a long moment, long enough that some old animal instinct in Marcus began to whisper that he'd miscalculated something, though he couldn't have said what. You'll know soon enough, Ethan said. Everyone will. He turned to Naomi. You don't have to explain anything to him. Not now. Not ever. Then, to Marcus, quieter. This conversation is over. He walked out without waiting for a response. Hands steady, jaw tight. 3 weeks of restraint, hanging by a single thread that would not hold much longer. Naomi found him in the loading dock an hour later, sitting on an overturned crate, staring at nothing. You didn't have to do that, she said, sitting beside him. Yeah, I did. He could get you fired. He's got more pull in this building than either of us. Ethan almost laughed at that, at how close and how far from true it was. He doesn't have as much pull as he thinks he does. She studied his profile in the dim garage light. There's something you're not telling me. There is, he admitted, finally. The first crack in 4 months of careful silence. And I will tell you. I promise. Just not yet. There are reasons, and none of them are about you not deserving to know. Is it something bad? No. He turned to look at her, and something in his face was so unguarded it made her breath catch. It's something that might change how you see me. And I needed you to know me first, before that happened. The real me, not the version people assume when they look at this uniform. I already know the real you, Naomi said quietly. I've known it for months. Neither of them said anything else for a long moment. It didn't need saying. It rained hard the following Friday, the kind of downpour that turned the sidewalks outside Seminotic Limited into rivers of reflected headlights, and Naomi's rideshare canceled twice in a row while she stood under the building's awning scrolling through app after app with growing frustration. Walk with me, Ethan said, appearing beside her with a single collapsible umbrella that had clearly been sitting in the lost and found bin behind the security desk for months. My apartment's on the way to the train station. We can share this, if you don't mind getting a little wet anyway. A little wet is generous, Naomi said, eyeing the sky, but she took his offered arm anyway. They walked 12 blocks in the rain, ducking under awnings when the wind turned the umbrella nearly useless. Laughing more than the weather warranted, Naomi's heels clicking unevenly against wet pavement, while Ethan matched his pace to hers without seeming to think about it. Somewhere around the 8th block, talk drifted from work gossip to something quieter. Can I ask you something? Naomi said, watching a streetlight blur gold through the rain. Do you ever think about what you'd do if you weren't doing this? Security, I mean. If money wasn't a factor at all. Ethan considered the question longer than she expected. I think I'd want to build something, he said finally. Not from scratch necessarily. Maybe something that already exists, but fix the parts of it that don't work for the people at the bottom. Make sure nobody clocks out 5 minutes after the last train leaves. Make sure the chairs don't have broken springs digging into somebody's back for 8 hours. He caught himself, aware he'd said more than he meant to. More specific than a security guard's daydream had any business being. Big dreams for a guy checking badges, I know. I don't think that's a small dream at all, Naomi said. I think that's the kind of thing people with real money never even think to want, because they've never had to sit in the chair with the broken spring. Maybe that's exactly why somebody who has sat in it should be the one deciding, Ethan said, quiet enough that the rain nearly swallowed it. They reached her train station stop before either of them was ready for the walk to end. Naomi lingered under the umbrella, a beat longer than necessary, rain drumming softly above them, her face tilted up toward his, in a way that made the whole street disappear for a moment. "Whatever it is you're not telling me," she said, "I hope it's something that lets you keep being exactly who you are right now." "It will," Ethan said, and meant it with his whole chest, though he still couldn't say how much that promise would eventually cost him to keep, or how close he'd come to breaking it in a conference room 3 weeks later. "I promise you that." She smiled, ducked out from under the umbrella into the station, and looked back once, before disappearing down the stairs. Ethan stood there a long moment after she'd gone, rain soaking through his uniform jacket, feeling more certain about something than he'd felt about anything since the day his father had told him to forget his own last name. 2 weeks before the champagne incident, on a night neither of them had planned, Naomi had invited Ethan to her apartment for dinner. Nothing fancy, she'd insisted, just pasta and a bottle of wine that cost less than the tip he usually left at restaurants he no longer let himself think about. Her apartment was small, warm, cluttered in the specific way of someone who had built a whole life out of things that mattered to her, rather than things that impressed other people. A corkboard by the kitchen held photos: her mother at a graduation ceremony, Naomi at 19 in a fast food uniform, a faded picture of a little girl holding a plastic microphone, like it was the most important object in the world. "That's me at 7, she said, catching him looking. "I wanted to be a singer. Then I found out I couldn't carry a tune to save my life, so I settled for telling other people's stories instead of my own voice." "Marketing," Ethan said. "Marketing," she agreed, stirring the pot on the stove. "It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I built it without anyone handing it to me. That matters to me more than people understand sometimes." "It matters to me too," Ethan said, quieter than he meant to. She glanced at him over her shoulder, something curious in her expression, like she'd caught the edge of something she couldn't quite name. "You say things like that, like you're not just being polite, like you actually understand what it costs to build something from nothing." "Maybe I'm trying to," he said carefully. "Maybe that's the whole reason I'm standing in a lobby checking badges for $11 an hour, instead of doing something else." What would the something else be? He almost told her then. The words were right there, sitting behind his teeth, 6 months collapsing into a single sentence he could have said, in the warm kitchen light, with her waiting for an answer. But he thought of his father's voice, of the promise, of how close they still were to the finish line, and he swallowed it one more time. "I don't know yet," he said instead, which was, in its own strange way, still true. "I'm still figuring out who I want to be when this is over." "For what it's worth," Naomi said, plating the pasta, sliding a bowl across the counter to him. "I like who you are right now. Whoever you decide to be after this, I hope he keeps some of this version." "He will," Ethan said, and meant it more than she could have known. "I promise you that." They ate dinner at her small kitchen table, knees bumping under it, laughing about nothing important, and Ethan understood, with a clarity that startled him, that whatever happened when the truth finally came out, he did not want to lose this ordinary, unremarkable, completely unearned warmth that had nothing to do with money or a company or a name on a building. It was the first thing in his life he'd built without his father's help, without a trust fund, without anyone knowing who he was. It was entirely, terrifyingly his own. 2 more weeks, Ethan said, mostly to himself. 2 more weeks until what? He shook his head, smiling faintly. "You'll see." The final 2 weeks passed like a held breath. Marcus, humiliated and unraveling, doubled down rather than backing off, filing a formal complaint against Ethan for insubordination and inappropriate conduct, pulling strings with an ally in HR to have it fast-tracked, determined to have Ethan removed before whatever was happening between him and Naomi could go any further. Ethan let it happen. He knew what was coming. His father had told him the exact date the 6 months would end, the same date as the company's quarterly leadership conference, the largest gathering of executives, department heads, and board members Seminotic Limited held all year. Richard Cross had planned it that way from the beginning. The morning of the conference, Ethan clocked in one final time, as Ethan Steele, badge clipped to his belt, boots on his feet, the uniform he'd worn for 6 months feeling, for the first time, like armor instead of a costume. Naomi found him at the front desk before the auditorium doors opened. "You're acting strange today. Good strange or bad strange?" "Undetermined." She smiled, though there was worry underneath it. "I heard Marcus filed something against you. Is that why you seem so calm about all of this?" "I'm calm," Ethan said, "because today, none of it matters anymore. That's cryptic, even for you." "Come to the conference," he said. "Please, I need you there." There was a version of this moment Ethan had rehearsed 100 times in his head over the past 6 months. Late at night, staring at the ceiling of the studio apartment, trying to find words that would make the truth land softly instead of like a dropped weight. He'd imagined telling her in her kitchen, over pasta, watching her face change in real time. He'd imagined telling her in the parking garage, quietly, just the two of them. He had never imagined telling her in front of 300 people, but his father had built the reveal that way for a reason Ethan understood even as it terrified him. Some truths need witnesses, not because the person deserves an audience, but because the people who'd been unkind needed to hear it in a room too full for denial. He thought too about Marcus, about the complaint sitting in HR's queue with his name on it, about the 6 months of small cruelties that had never once been logged anywhere except in a notebook in Ethan's jacket pocket. He thought about Gus, who'd started watching him with suspicion he didn't deserve because rumors had done what 6 months of honest work could not undo in an afternoon. He thought about Wilfred, 19 years unseen, still showing up every night to empty the same trash cans in the same hallways nobody else noticed needed emptying. None of them had asked to be part of his father's experiment. They'd simply been kind, or unkind, without knowing the stakes were ever this high. That felt, suddenly, like the most important thing to get right. "I wasn't invited, Ethan. I'm not senior staff." "You're invited," he said. "Trust me." She searched his face for a long moment, found something there she couldn't name, but chose to believe anyway, and nodded. The main auditorium filled slowly with over 300 employees, department heads, VPs, junior staff who'd been told attendance was mandatory this year, without much explanation. Marcus sat near the front, smug in a new suit, certain that whatever happened today, his complaint would finally see Ethan Steele removed from the building for good. He'd made sure of it. He'd called in every favor he had. Naomi slipped into a seat near the back, uncertain why she'd been asked to come at all, scanning the room for Ethan and not finding him among the crowd. The lights dimmed. Richard Cross walked onto the stage to warm applause. Tall, silver-haired, carrying the same quiet authority that had built this company from a single office 30 years ago. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began. "I know this conference is usually about numbers, forecasts, quarterly performance. Today, I want to talk about something else, about legacy." A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. 6 months ago, I made a decision that not one person in this building, outside of myself and my wife, knew about. Richard's eyes swept the crowd slowly, deliberately. "I sent my son to work among you, not as an executive, not as an observer with a clipboard, as one of you, on the ground floor, in a uniform, earning $11 an hour like anyone else in this building, learning what this company actually feels like to the people who make it run." The room had gone utterly silent. For 6 months, my son worked security in this very lobby, under the name Ethan Steele. Somewhere near the front, Marcus Voss felt the blood drain from his face. I wanted him to understand what it means to be dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. Because someday, this company will be his, and I refuse to hand it to a man who has never known what it costs the people beneath him to build it. Richard paused, letting the weight of the room settle. "So today, I'd like to introduce you to the future CEO of Seminotic Limited." Ethan walked onto the stage. He wasn't wearing the uniform anymore. He wore a suit that fit like it belonged to him, because it did, because it always had, and the transformation was so complete that for a moment, half the auditorium didn't recognize him at all. Then recognition rippled through the crowd like a wave. Gasps, murmurs, someone near the front actually standing up out of shock. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus Voss sat frozen, every certainty he'd built his cruelty on collapsing in real time. "Some of you were kind to me these past 6 months," Ethan said into the microphone, his voice steady, carrying across the silent room. "You didn't know who I was. You had no reason to be kind, you just were, because that's who you are, and I will remember every single one of you." His eyes found Naomi in the back row, and something in his face softened. "Some of you were not kind, and I want to be clear, I remember that too." His gaze moved deliberately to Marcus, who had gone pale as chalk in the front row. "Mr. Voss filed a formal complaint against Ethan Steele this week," Ethan continued, and the room's attention swung as one toward Marcus, who looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. "For insubordination. I'd like to address that complaint personally." Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "For 6 months, you humiliated a man you believed had no power to stop you," Ethan said. "Quiet now. but the microphone carried every word to the back wall. You spilled a drink on him in front of investors. You spread rumors to HR you knew weren't true. You cornered a colleague in a conference room and made her feel unsafe in her own workplace. And when a security guard stepped in to protect her, you called him nothing, a joke, someone with no family and no future. He let that sit. You were wrong about all three. The silence in the room had a texture now, thick and suffocating. Effective immediately. Your employment with Seminotic Limited is terminated, Ethan said. Not because you didn't know who I was. Plenty of people in this room didn't, and I hold nothing against them for it. You're terminated because of who you chose to be when you thought no one who mattered was watching. That's not a mistake, Mr. Voss. That's a character, and it's not one this company has room for. Security, the real security team, the ones who'd known all along, quietly briefed by Richard weeks earlier, moved toward Marcus's row. He stood on unsteady legs, face burning, 300 pairs of eyes fixed on him as he was escorted out of the auditorium in complete, humiliating silence. The same silence he had once counted on a guard to absorb without complaint. The doors closed behind him. The room exhaled as one. Applause broke out first in scattered pockets, then swelled across the entire auditorium. For Ethan, for Richard, for the 6 months no one had known were happening right in front of them. Gus, standing near the side exit, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and didn't bother hiding it. Wilfred the janitor, who'd never once been invited to a company party, stood and clapped louder than anyone. Naomi sat frozen through all of it, heart pounding, the pieces of 6 months rearranging themselves in her mind. Every unfinished sentence, every quiet, "you'll see," every moment she'd felt like he was holding something back, not out of dishonesty, but out of care. Outside the auditorium doors, Marcus stood alone in the marble hallway, security escort already gone, his phone buzzing uselessly in his pocket with messages he had no intention of answering. He replayed the last 6 months in fragments, the champagne glass tipping, the conference room, the parking garage, and understood, for the first time with real clarity, that every insult he had aimed downward had actually been aimed, without his knowing it, straight up at the one person in the building who could end his career with a single sentence. It wasn't power that had exposed him. It was the absence of it that had revealed exactly who he was when he thought no one who mattered was watching. He left the building that afternoon through the same staff entrance Ethan had used every single morning for 6 months, and did not come back. After the conference ended and the crowd began to disperse in a haze of stunned conversation, Ethan found Naomi exactly where she'd been sitting, still absorbing it all. "You could have told me," she said, though there was no real accusation in it, only disbelief. "I wanted to," Ethan said, "every single day. But I needed you to know me before you knew what came with me. I needed to know that whatever this was between us," he gestured vaguely between them, suddenly less composed than he'd been on stage a moment ago, "was real. Not because of what I could give you, because of who I actually am. You spilled champagne on your own suit once to help me carry 100 handouts up 4 flights of stairs when the elevator broke," Naomi said, something wet and bright in her eyes. "I already knew who you were, Ethan. I just didn't know your last name. Cross," he said softly. "Ethan Cross." "I like Steele fine," she said, and laughed, half a sob, half genuine joy. "But I think I can get used to the other one." He reached for her hand, and this time, in front of everyone, in the building his family had built, and would soon be his to run, he didn't have to hide a single part of it. Richard found his son backstage after the applause finally settled, still buttoning the top of his suit jacket, looking somehow both younger and older than he had 6 months earlier. "Well," Richard said, "you didn't break. I almost did. More than once." "I know." His father's voice carried something rare in it. Not pride exactly, or not only pride. Something closer to relief. "I watched more of it than you think. Cameras in the lobby, reports from Gus. I saw the champagne. I saw the conference room with Voss. I let it happen because I needed to know you'd hold the line, even when I wasn't there, to remind you why it mattered. You could have pulled me out. After the gala. I could have," Richard admitted. "I almost did. Your mother nearly made me." He put a hand on Ethan's shoulder, heavier with meaning than weight. "But a man who quits the moment it costs him something isn't ready to run a company full of people who don't get to quit when things get hard. You needed to prove it to yourself as much as to me." "For 6 months," Ethan said, "I understood people I work with differently now." There was a story Richard rarely told, one Ethan had only heard in pieces over the years, usually late at night, usually after a second glass of scotch loosened something in his father that boardrooms never could. 34 years earlier, Richard Cross had been a 19-year-old night shift security guard at a downtown finance building, working doubles to pay for community college classes he took during the day, sleeping in 2-hour stretches between shifts. He'd watched executives walk past him for 2 years without a single one learning his name. He'd watched a junior analyst named Thomas Okafor treat him like furniture, right up until the night Richard caught a break-in attempt on the 40th floor and saved that same analyst's office from being cleaned out. Thomas remembered his name after that. Thomas also, eventually, became the first investor to believe in Richard's idea for a logistics company that would one day become Humiliated Limited. People change when it costs them something to keep ignoring you, Richard had told Ethan once, the Scotch loosening the words. I never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. I promised myself that if I ever built something big enough, I'd make sure invisible never happened to anyone under my roof without me knowing about it first. It was, Ethan understood now, the truest explanation his father had ever given for the 6 months just past. Not a test designed to prove Ethan worthy of an inheritance, but a repetition of the only lesson Richard had ever trusted enough to build an empire on. Cruelty finds the people who can't fight back. Kindness finds the people worth keeping close, long after the uniform comes off and the truth comes out. Ethan thought about Gus's granddaughter, about Wilfred's 19 years without a single invitation, about every small dismissal he'd absorbed on behalf of people who had absorbed far worse for far longer, with no father waiting at the end of it to make things right. That part, I don't regret. That, Richard said, was always the point. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened at the Humiliated Limited Leadership Conference spread through the company like wildfire, and eventually beyond it. A cautionary tale for anyone who ever mistook a uniform for a measure of a person's worth. Marcus Voss never worked in the industry again with the same reputation he once had. Word travels fast in rooms full of people who witnessed exactly who he was when he thought no one who mattered could see him. Gus got a raise and a promotion to head of building operations, the granddaughter's college fund finally breathing easier. Wilfred was invited to every company event from then on. Front row, seat reserved. And Richard Cross, watching his son take the podium 3 months later, at his official installation as CEO, felt something settle in his chest that no boardroom victory had ever given him. The quiet certainty that he'd raised a man, not just an heir. Ethan Cross became CEO of Humiliated Limited that spring, and Naomi Carter stood in the front row when it happened, exactly where she belonged. Exactly where she'd earned her place. Not because of who she loved, but because of who she'd always been, long before she knew his name. He kept the old security uniform, cleaned and pressed, hung in a garment bag in the back of his office closet. Sometimes, on the hardest days, when the weight of running an empire felt heavier than any spreadsheet had prepared him for, he'd open that closet and remember exactly what it felt like to be invisible, and exactly why he never wanted to make another person feel that way again. A year into his role as CEO, Ethan walked the 40th floor renovation project himself, checking in on the new break room built for staff who'd spent decades without one worth the name. Gus, graying now, walked beside him with the easy familiarity of 2 men who'd once shared double shifts and burnt coffee. You did good, kid, Gus said. I mean it. Most people forget where they came from the second the doors open for them. I had 6 months of reminders, Ethan said. Some people just need a longer memory than others. Naomi found them there, clipboard in hand. She'd left marketing 8 months earlier for a role she'd built herself. Director of Employee Experience, a position that hadn't existed in the company until she pitched it directly to Ethan over dinner one night, half joking, entirely serious. He'd approved it within the week, not because she was his, but because the proposal was better than anything the consultants had produced in a decade. Chairs came in, she said, nodding toward the lobby below. New ones. No more broken springs digging into anyone's back for an 8-hour shift. 41 entries, Ethan said, half to himself, thinking of a small notebook long since retired to a desk drawer, its work finally finished. I think we're down to about 6 left on the list. Then we've got 6 things left to fix, Naomi said. And about 100 more nobody's noticed yet. He looked at her, his wife of 4 months now, a fact that still occasionally caught him by surprise with how ordinary and how extraordinary it felt at once. And thought about the man who had once told him he was nothing, a joke, someone with no family and no future. Marcus Voss had been wrong about all 3, but perhaps most of all, he had been wrong about what actually made a person worth loving in the first place. It was never the name on the door. It was what a person did with the time before anyone was watching, and what they chose to become because of it, not in spite of it. Later that evening, after the last of the renovation crew had gone home, Ethan and Naomi walked out through the same staff entrance he'd used every single day of those 6 months, the one around back that most executives never even knew existed. The night guard on duty, a young woman barely out of college working her way through a criminal justice degree, waved them through with a tired smile. "Night, Mr. Cross? Night, Mrs. Cross? Everything all right tonight, Priya?" Ethan asked, stopping instead of simply nodding the way most people in the building still expected him to. "Slow night," she said, surprised, the way people were still occasionally surprised when the CEO stopped to ask a real question. "Feet are killing me, but slow's good. New chairs should be in by Friday," Naomi said. "Ethan made sure yours got ordered first, actually." Priya laughed, a little disbelieving. "You remembered the chair thing?" "I remember all of it," Ethan said. And he meant the whole 6 months. Every small dismissal and every quiet kindness, filed away permanently in a place nothing would ever erase. That's kind of the job now. They walked out into the cool night air, the gold S of the Seminotic Limited sign glowing above them against the darkening sky, and neither of them looked back to see it, because they didn't need to. They already knew exactly what it looked like from the other side. 6 months changed everything, Ethan said quietly. "No," Naomi said, taking his hand as they walked toward the elevator together. "I think you changed everything. The 6 months just gave you the room to prove it. What would you have done if you found out the security guard, humiliating you all along, was about to become your boss? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story moved you even a little, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we've got more stories like this one coming, and you will not want to miss what's next."